The summer heat was already building that Sunday morning in Springfield, Missouri, when Janelle Kirby realized something was terribly wrong. The date was June 7th, 1992, and she had been waiting since 9 in the morning for her two best friends to pick her up for their planned trip to Whitewater Theme Park. Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall were supposed to be there by now, ready to celebrate their high school graduation with a day of fun in the sun. But they never showed up. Janelle knew her friends well enough to understand that this was completely out of character. Both 19-year-old Suzanne, who went by Susie, and 18-year-old Stacy were responsible young women who never broke their promises without explanation. The silence from their end was deafening, and as the minutes ticked by, a gnawing worry began to settle in Janelle's stomach. If you're watching this story unfold, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Janelle's concern grew stronger as she tried calling the Levitt residence on East Delmar Street, where the girls had planned to spend the night after their graduation festivities. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. This was especially strange because Susie's mother, Cheryl Levitt, was known to be an early riser who would typically be awake and moving around the house by this time of day. The 47-year-old cosmetologist worked at a local salon and maintained a consistent routine that her neighbors and friends had come to expect. Finally, unable to shake her mounting anxiety, Janelle decided to drive over to the house with her boyfriend, Mike Henson. The two-story residence at 1717 East Delmar sat quietly in the morning sun, looking perfectly normal from the outside. Susie's red Mazda Miata and Stacy's Toyota Corolla were both parked in the driveway, exactly where they should be if the girls had made it home safely the night before. But something felt off about the entire scene. When Janelle approached the front door, she discovered it was unlocked, which was unusual for Cheryl, who was typically very security-conscious about her home. The wooden door swung open easily under Janelle's tentative push, revealing the interior of a house that appeared normal at first glance, but contained subtle signs that something was amiss. The living room looked tidy, though there were a few items that seemed slightly out of place. Susie's purse sat where she might have left it, and Stacy's belongings were visible as well. All three women's cars were accounted for in the driveway, along with their purses, money, cigarettes, and even their keys. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind every material possession that would be necessary for them to function in the outside world. What caught Janelle's immediate attention was the shattered glass scattered across the front porch. The globe covering the porch light had been broken, though the light bulb itself remained intact. The broken glass crunched under her feet as she called out for her friends, but the house remained eerily silent. Not even Cinnamon, Cheryl's small family dog, came to greet them, though the pet was later found safe inside the house. Mike, trying to be helpful and noticing that Janelle was barefoot, began sweeping up the broken glass from the porch. Neither of them realized at the time that they might be disturbing a potential crime scene. In their minds, they were simply looking for their friends and trying to make sense of an increasingly puzzling situation. The innocent act of cleaning up the glass would later become a point of frustration for investigators who arrived at the scene hours later. Inside the house, the signs of normalcy were mixed with subtle indicators that something had gone wrong during the night. Cheryl's bed appeared to have been slept in, with the covers pulled back in a way that suggested she had been resting there at some point. However, the bedroom also contained an awkwardly bent window blind that seemed out of place, as if it had been disturbed during some kind of commotion. In Susie's room, a television was still on, casting its glow across the space, and an unopened can of soda sat beside a pack of cigarettes on a nearby surface. These small details painted a picture of a night that had been interrupted suddenly, as if the three women had been in the middle of their normal routines when something unexpected occurred. The most chilling discovery came when Janelle decided to check the answering machine for any messages that might explain her friend's whereabouts. She pressed the play button and listened as a strange, unsettling voice filled the room. The message was cryptic and disturbing, but before she could fully process its content or replay it for further analysis, the machine automatically erased the recording, as was common with most answering machines of that era after a message was played once. That erased message would haunt investigators for years to come, as police later determined that it might have contained crucial information about what happened to the three women. The timing and content of the call suggested that whoever left it had knowledge about the disappearances, but the evidence had been inadvertently destroyed in those first crucial hours when friends and family were simply trying to understand what had happened. Janelle's discovery of the empty house and the strange message prompted her to immediately call the Springfield Police Department to report the three women missing. By the time officers arrived at the scene, however, the investigation was already complicated by the presence of multiple friends and family members who had come to the house throughout the day, trying to help locate the missing women. The crime scene, if indeed it was a crime scene, had been compromised by well-meaning visitors who cleaned coffee cups, emptied ashtrays, and generally tidied up the residence while waiting for news. Police later estimated that between 10 and 20 people had been in and out of the house before they could properly secure and examine the location. This contamination of potential evidence would prove to be one of the early challenges that investigators faced in trying to piece together what had happened during those crucial hours between late Saturday night and early Sunday morning. When Springfield Police Department officer Rick Bookout arrived at the residence, he immediately noticed the chaotic nature of the scene. People were coming and going from the house, the front door stood open, and several individuals were gathered in the yard discussing the situation. The informal nature of the scene made it difficult for police to conduct the kind of methodical examination that might have revealed crucial clues about the women's fate. Despite the contaminated crime scene, investigators were able to determine several important facts about the night in question. The three women had last been seen at approximately 2:15 in the morning on June 7th, when Susie and Stacy left a graduation party in a nearby community and drove to Cheryl's house on East Delmar Street. Friends at the party later confirmed that the two young women had initially planned to stay at Janelle Kirby's house, but had changed their minds when they discovered that Janelle's home was already crowded with other friends who were staying overnight. The decision to go to Cheryl's house instead appeared to have been made spontaneously, which meant that very few people knew where the two graduates had planned to spend the night. This detail would become important to investigators, as it suggested that whoever was responsible for the disappearances either had inside knowledge of the women's plans or had encountered them by chance at the Delmar Street residence. Cheryl Levitt had last been heard from at approximately 11:15 on Saturday night, June 6th, when she spoke with a friend about her plans to paint a chest of drawers. The conversation had been routine and pleasant, with no indication that Cheryl was expecting visitors or was concerned about any potential problems. She had settled in for the night, expecting a quiet Sunday at home, with no way of knowing that her daughter and Stacy would decide to stay at her house instead of their original plan. The physical evidence at the scene was minimal but telling. Apart from the broken porch light globe, there were no signs of a struggle anywhere in the house. The women's belongings were all accounted for, including their driver's licenses, medication, and personal items that they would never have left behind voluntarily. The fact that all three cars remained in the driveway suggested that the women had been taken from the residence rather than leaving on their own accord. One detail that caught the attention of investigators was the positioning of Susie's red Mazda Miata in the driveway. According to Nigel Kenny, a co-worker and close friend of Susie's, she was a creature of habit who always parked her car in the same spot in the carport. However, on the morning of June 7th, her vehicle was parked in an unusual location in the driveway, suggesting that either someone else had moved it or that Susie had been forced to park in a different spot when she and Stacy arrived at the house. As news of the disappearances spread throughout Springfield, the community began to mobilize in support of the families. Volunteers organized search parties to comb through the rural areas surrounding the city, hoping to find any trace of the missing women. The Missouri State Highway Patrol joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise to bear on the case. The families of the three women were thrust into a nightmare scenario, dealing not only with their overwhelming worry about their loved ones, but also with the intense media attention that the case quickly attracted. Stacy McCall's parents, Stuart and Janice, found themselves at the center of a media storm as reporters and television crews descended on Springfield to cover the story. The McCall's anguish was palpable as they pleaded for information about their daughter's whereabouts, holding press conferences and distributing flyers in hopes that someone had seen something that could help locate the missing women. Susie's father, Donald Streeter, and other family members also became advocates for keeping the case in the public eye. They understood that as time passed, public interest might wane, and they were determined to prevent their loved ones from being forgotten. The families worked tirelessly with local media outlets, appearing on television and radio programs to keep the disappearances in the news and to encourage anyone with information to contact the authorities. The Springfield Police Department found themselves dealing with a case that was both high-profile and extraordinarily difficult to solve. Unlike many missing persons cases, there were no obvious suspects, no clear motive, and virtually no physical evidence to guide the investigation. The broken porch light remained the only sign that anything violent or unusual had occurred at the residence, and even that could have had an innocent explanation. Detective Neil Wenskunas was assigned as the lead investigator on the case, and he quickly recognized that they were dealing with something unprecedented in the department's experience. The simultaneous disappearance of 3 people from a residence with no signs of struggle and no obvious connection to any known criminal activity was virtually unheard of in Springfield's crime history. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded to include interviews with hundreds of people who had known the 3 women or who had been in the vicinity of the East Delmar residence on the night of the disappearances. Police spoke with everyone who had attended the graduation parties that Susie and Stacy had visited, trying to piece together a timeline of the young women's movements and to identify anyone who might have followed them or shown unusual interest in their activities. The investigation also focused on Cheryl Levitt's personal life, examining her relationships and daily routines for any indication of why someone might have targeted her or her home. As a single mother and business owner, Cheryl had built a stable life for herself and her daughter, but investigators needed to explore every possibility, including the chance that she had encountered someone who posed a threat to her safety. One of the most frustrating aspects of the case was the erased answering machine message that Janelle had inadvertently deleted in those first chaotic hours. Police were convinced that the mysterious call might have contained vital information about the disappearances, but without the actual recording, they had to rely on Janelle's imperfect recollection of what she had heard. The message had been unsettling and cryptic, but the specific details had been lost forever, leaving investigators to wonder what crucial clues might have been contained in that brief recording. The search for the Springfield 3 expanded beyond the immediate area as investigators considered the possibility that the women had been taken elsewhere. Rural Missouri contained vast areas of wilderness where bodies could be hidden, and search teams spent countless hours combing through forests, abandoned buildings, and remote properties. The searches were hampered by the terrain and the sheer size of the area that needed to be covered, but volunteers and law enforcement officers continued their efforts, driven by the hope that they might find some trace of the missing women. As summer turned to fall, the case remained as mysterious as ever. The initial surge of media attention began to fade, and the investigation settled into the methodical work of following up on tips and pursuing leads that seemed to go nowhere. The families of the three women refused to give up hope, but they also had to confront the growing possibility that their loved ones might never be found. The Springfield community had been deeply affected by the disappearances, particularly because they involved people who were well-known and well-liked in the area. Susie and Stacy had been popular students who had just graduated from high school and were looking forward to bright futures. Cheryl had been a respected member of the community who was known for her kindness and dedication to her work and her daughter. The fact that three such ordinary, innocent people could simply vanish without a trace was profoundly unsettling to everyone who lived in the area. By December of 1992, the case had attracted national attention when it was featured on America's Most Wanted. The television program generated significant interest and prompted a flood of tips from viewers across the country. On December 31st, a particularly intriguing call came into the show's hotline. The caller claimed to have prime knowledge of the abductions, but the call was mysteriously disconnected when the switchboard operator attempted to transfer it to Springfield investigators. Police made public appeals for the anonymous caller to contact them again, believing that he might possess crucial information about what had happened to the three women. The timing of the call, coming exactly 6 months after the disappearances, seemed significant, but despite their efforts, the mysterious caller never contacted authorities again. The incident added another layer of frustration to an already complex case, as investigators were left to wonder whether they had missed an opportunity to break the case wide open. As 1993 began, the investigation continued, but the trail had grown cold. Tips still came in regularly, but most led nowhere or were based on speculation rather than concrete evidence. The Springfield Police Department maintained their commitment to the case, but they also had to balance their efforts with other ongoing investigations and the daily demands of law enforcement in a growing city. The families of the missing women established a foundation to keep the case in the public eye and to provide support for other families dealing with missing persons cases. They organized annual remembrance events and continued to work with media outlets to ensure that the Springfield Three were not forgotten. Their persistence paid off in terms of keeping the case active, but it also served as a constant reminder of their ongoing pain and uncertainty. One of the most difficult aspects of the case was the complete lack of closure for the families involved. Without bodies or any definitive evidence of what had happened, they were left in a state of suspended grief, unable to properly mourn their loved ones or to move forward with their lives. The uncertainty was perhaps even more painful than definitive bad news would have been, as it prevented them from finding any sense of peace or resolution. In 1997, 5 years after the disappearances, Cheryl Levitt and Susie Streeter were declared legally dead, allowing their families to settle their estates and handle practical matters that had been left in limbo. However, the case files remained officially listed as missing persons rather than homicides, reflecting the fact that no evidence had been found to definitively prove that the women had been killed. The declaration of death also marked a turning point in how the families approached their advocacy efforts. While they never stopped hoping that their loved ones might still be alive, They also had to acknowledge the likelihood that Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy were gone forever. This realization brought its own form of grief, as they had to let go of the hope that had sustained them through 5 years of uncertainty. Throughout the late 1990s, several potential suspects emerged in the case, each bringing new hope that the mystery might finally be solved. One early focus was Dustin Reckler, a former boyfriend of Susie Streeter, who had been involved in criminal activity around the time of the disappearances. Reckler had broken into a Springfield mausoleum a few months before the women vanished, stealing gold fillings from a skull in what appeared to be a bizarre and disturbing crime. The connection between Reckler and the case seemed promising because Susie had given investigators a statement about the mausoleum break-in and was rumored to be preparing to testify against him in court. This potential motive for silencing a witness gave investigators something concrete to pursue, and they spent considerable time and resources examining Reckler's whereabouts on the night of June 6th and 7th. However, despite extensive investigation, police were unable to find any evidence linking Reckler to the disappearances. His alibi for the night in question was solid, and there was no physical evidence connecting him to the East Delmar residence or to the missing women. While the mausoleum incident demonstrated that Reckler was capable of disturbing and criminal behavior, investigators concluded that he was not responsible for the Springfield 3 disappearances. Another suspect who generated significant interest was Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and robber who claimed in 1997 to have knowledge about the women's murders. Cox told investigators that he knew the women had been killed and that their bodies would never be recovered, but he provided no concrete evidence to support his claims and frequently changed his story when pressed for details. Cox's criminal history made him a person of interest, particularly because he had been convicted of kidnapping and had demonstrated a pattern of violence against women. However, his claims about the Springfield 3 appeared to be attempts to gain attention or to negotiate better treatment in prison rather than genuine confessions. Investigators concluded that Cox had no credibility regarding the case, and his statements were dismissed as fabrications. The most intriguing suspect to emerge was Larry Dwayne Hall, a suspected serial killer who traveled throughout the Midwest participating in Civil War reenactments. Hall was believed to be responsible for the abductions, rapes, and murders of dozens of young women and girls across multiple states, and his pattern of activity seemed to correlate with the timing and location of the Springfield disappearances. What made Hall particularly interesting as a suspect was his connection to the Springfield area through historical reenactments. Wilson's Creek National Battlefield was located just 5 minutes from where Janelle Kirby lived, and there had been 2 Civil War battle reenactments on June 6, 1992, in Pleasant Hope, Missouri, which was only 30 minutes north of Springfield. The timing was almost too perfect to be coincidental, as Hall would have been in the immediate area on the day before the women disappeared. Jimmy Keene, a former FBI operative, was tasked with befriending Hall in prison and gaining his trust in hopes of extracting information about his crimes. The operation was successful in that Hall admitted to specific details about many of his murders, providing information that only the killer could have known. Hall had apparently kept a map of his victims, though this crucial evidence was never recovered after Keene revealed his true identity to the suspected serial killer. The pattern of Hall's crimes was particularly disturbing and seemed to fit the Springfield case in several ways. Nearly all of his accused murders occurred during the months of March, June, August, and September, between 1980 and 1994, which corresponded perfectly with the timing of Civil War reenactments in the Midwest. The June 7th disappearance fell exactly within this pattern, making Hall a compelling suspect in the eyes of many investigators and amateur sleuths. However, despite the circumstantial evidence linking Hall to the Springfield area and the timing of his other crimes, investigators were never able to find concrete evidence connecting him to the disappearances of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. Hall himself never admitted to involvement in the Springfield case, even when he was providing detailed confessions about his other crimes. The lack of physical evidence or definitive proof meant that Hall remained a suspect, but could not be charged in connection with the disappearances. As the years passed, the case continued to generate interest from amateur investigators and online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. The advent of the Internet provided new platforms for discussing the evidence and theories surrounding the Springfield Three, but it also led to the spread of speculation and misinformation that sometimes complicated the official investigation. One theory that gained considerable attention involved the possibility that the women's bodies had been buried in the foundation of a parking garage at Cox Hospital in Springfield. The tip came from someone who claimed to have inside knowledge of the crime, though investigators noted that the informant provided no evidence or logical reasoning to support the theory. In 2007, crime reporter Kathy Baird invited mechanical engineer Rick Norland to scan a corner of the hospital parking garage with ground-penetrating radar. Norland's scan revealed 3 anomalies that he said were roughly the same size and consistent with grave site locations. 2 of the anomalies were parallel to each other, while the third was perpendicular, creating a pattern that some interpreted as evidence of buried bodies. The discovery generated significant excitement among those following the case, but the Springfield Police Department remained skeptical about the tip. Spokesperson Lisa Cox pointed out that the parking garage had not begun construction until September 1993, more than a year after the disappearances. She also noted that digging up the area and reconstructing the garage would be extremely costly, and without reasonable evidence that the bodies were actually located there, it would be illogical to proceed with such an expensive and disruptive excavation. Investigators also revealed that the original tip had come from someone who claimed to be psychic or to have had a dream or vision about the case, which further undermined its credibility in the eyes of law enforcement. While the radar anomalies were intriguing, they could have been caused by any number of factors unrelated to the missing women, including utility lines, construction materials, or natural variations in the soil composition. The parking garage theory exemplified one of the ongoing challenges in the Springfield 3 case: the abundance of theories and tips that seemed promising on the surface, but lacked the concrete evidence necessary to justify expensive or time-consuming investigative efforts. Over the years, investigators had pursued hundreds of leads that ultimately led nowhere, and they had learned to be cautious about committing significant resources without strong evidence to support a particular theory. As the case entered its second decade, the families of the missing women continued their advocacy efforts, but also had to adapt to the reality that they might never learn what happened to their loved ones. The pain of not knowing was a constant presence in their lives, affecting their ability to find closure and move forward. Yet, they also found strength in their determination to keep the case alive and to support other families dealing with similar tragedies. The Springfield community had not forgotten the 3 women, and annual remembrance events continued to draw hundreds of people who wanted to show their support for the families and their commitment to finding answers. These gatherings served multiple purposes. They kept the case in the public eye, they provided emotional support for the families, and they demonstrated that the community had not given up hope, that justice might eventually be served. Law enforcement agencies also remained committed to the case, even as the original investigators retired and were replaced by new generations of officers and detectives. The Springfield Police Department maintained the case files and continued to follow up on credible tips, while the FBI and other federal agencies provided assistance when needed. The case was periodically reviewed by fresh eyes in hopes that new perspectives or advances in forensic technology might reveal previously overlooked clues. One of the most significant developments in recent years has been the advancement of DNA analysis and other forensic techniques that were not available in 1992. While the lack of physical evidence from the original crime scene limited the potential applications of these new technologies, investigators remained hopeful that future developments might provide new avenues for solving the case. The Springfield 3 disappearances had also become a case study in the challenges of investigating missing persons cases, particularly those involving multiple victims and minimal physical evidence. Law enforcement agencies across the country studied the case as an example of both the difficulties inherent in such investigations and the importance of proper crime scene management in the crucial early hours of a case. The contamination of the East Delmar Street residence in the first day after the disappearances was cited as an example of how well-meaning friends and family members could inadvertently compromise important evidence. This lesson had influenced training protocols for police departments and had emphasized the importance of securing crime scenes immediately, even when the nature of the incident was not immediately clear. As the case approached its 20th anniversary, media outlets across the country revisited the story, generating renewed interest and attention. Television documentaries, podcast series, and newspaper retrospectives brought the case to a new generation of viewers who had not been aware of the disappearances. This renewed attention generated fresh tips and theories, though none proved to be the breakthrough that investigators and families had hoped for. The families of the missing women used these anniversary milestones as opportunities to make renewed pleas for information and to remind the public that the case remained active and important. They understood that someone, somewhere, had knowledge about what happened on that June night in 1992, and they continued to believe that person might eventually come forward with the information needed to solve the case. The emotional toll of the extended investigation and uncertainty had been enormous for everyone involved. The families had endured decades of false hopes, disappointing leads, and the constant pain of not knowing what happened to their loved ones. Yet they had also found strength in their shared determination to seek justice and to ensure that Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy were not forgotten. As the case moved into its third decade, new investigative techniques continued to emerge, offering hope that previously unavailable tools might eventually provide answers. Advances in genealogical DNA analysis, improved database searches, and enhanced forensic technologies represented potential avenues for progress, even in a case with limited physical evidence. The Internet had also changed the landscape of cold case investigations, providing platforms for information sharing and amateur investigation that could sometimes complement official police work. Online communities dedicated to the Springfield 3 case continued to analyze evidence, discuss theories, and generate new ideas that were occasionally passed along to law enforcement for consideration. However, the abundance of online speculation also created challenges, as investigators had to sort through countless theories and accusations to identify potentially credible information. The democratization of information through the Internet had both positive and negative effects on cold case investigations, providing new opportunities for breakthroughs while also creating additional noise that could complicate official efforts. Throughout all of these developments, one fact remained constant. 3 innocent women had vanished without a trace on a summer night in Springfield, Missouri, leaving behind families and a community that refused to forget them. The search for answers continued, driven by love, determination, and an unshakable belief that truth and justice would eventually prevail. The Springfield 3 case had become more than just a missing persons investigation. It had evolved into a symbol of the enduring power of hope and the refusal to give up in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The families, investigators, and community members who continued to work on the case understood that they might never find the answers they sought, but they also knew that giving up was not an option. As each year passed, the case remained a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing the time we have with our loved ones. It also served as a testament to the strength of families and communities in the face of tragedy, demonstrating that love and determination could endure even the most difficult circumstances. The story of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall continued to resonate with people across the country who were moved by the mystery of their disappearance and inspired by the dedication of those who refused to let their memory fade. Their case had become a part of American true crime history, ensuring that their names would be remembered and their story would be told for generations to come. The investigation into the Springfield 3 disappearances remained active, with law enforcement agencies continuing to follow up on tips and explore new investigative techniques. While the case had not been solved after more than 30 years, the commitment to finding answers had never wavered. The families, investigators, and community members involved in the case continued to hold on to hope that someday, somehow, the truth about what happened on that June night in 1992 would finally be revealed. The legacy of the Springfield 3 extended far beyond the borders of Missouri, serving as an inspiration to other families dealing with missing persons cases and as a reminder to law enforcement agencies about the importance of never giving up on unsolved cases. Their story had touched countless lives and had demonstrated the power of persistence, love, and hope in the face of unimaginable loss.